Taoiseach, the report of the Independent Review Group into the Defence Forces is damning and it is deeply disturbing. It details a toxic culture that has become embedded in the Defence Forces, in which abuse, bullying, harassment, sexual assault and rape occur regularly and with impunity. The Defence Forces, we are told, barely tolerates women and, at its worst, verbally, physically, sexually and psychologically abuses women in its ranks. Almost 9 out of 10 women who responded to the review group experienced sexual harassment, while nearly 50% reported sexual assaults. There was a discernible pattern of rape and sexual assault, that's a quote, in barracks, swimming areas, naval boats, showers and abroad on foreign deployments. Making a complaint about abuse and mistreatment was said to be career-ending and would result in intimidation and in retaliation. The main perpetrators of the abuse were male officers, and there is evidence of serial perpetrators whose behaviour was not only never addressed, but in fact actually rewarded. A consistent and embedded theme is that some members of the Defence Forces management abuse their positions of power and command in the treatment of subordinates. The report bluntly concludes the Defence Forces is unable or unwilling to make the changes that are needed to provide a safe working environment. And there has been an inability of the leadership to change the situation over the last 20 years. Meanwhile, initiatives to address unacceptable behaviour brought in by the current leadership in 2021 and 2022 were, quote, reactive and overdue and had not yet yielded significant results. Taoiseach, yesterday, Chief of Staff Sean Clancy said he had been completely unaware of the endemic abuse in the Defence Forces for most of his 40-year career. Given the pervasive nature of the sadistic abuse that is detailed in this report, it's hard to understand how that could be the case. And if it is true, and the Chief of Staff was blissfully unaware of the horrific abuse for the duration of his career, it speaks to a level of disconnection that is deeply worrying. It's also deeply concerning to read in the Irish Independent today that Lieutenant General Clancy and his predecessors gave repeated assurances to your government and to previous governments that robust measures were in place to deal with abuse and support victims. This is clearly not the case and has never been the case. Not only were victims not supported, they were targeted and further abused if they tried to come forward. In contrast, perpetrators were promoted and rewarded. This continued not just for years, but for decades. It drove excellent members of the Defence Forces out of the institution and resulted in huge levels of trauma and suffering. My question is simple. Do you have confidence in the current leadership of the Defence Forces?
Well, in the first instance, I thank the Deputy for raising the question, and I want to commend the courage of those women and indeed men who have shared their experiences and who have come forward through Women of Honour and Men and Women of Honour, and also current serving members of the Defence Forces who are not members of those specific groups, who have also been very candid and frank in sharing their experiences with me in recent times and indeed with the department. And only for them, really, I think the full scale of this would not have been revealed, and that led to the establishment of the scoping review and the independent review group, which then met quite a number of people, and a lot of people volunteered this information to the group, and also Raise a Concern had been established by the predecessor over a year ago, which is a confidential service where people can come and share their experiences. And I met with the people who oversee Raise a Concern, and again there's a very strong alignment between what's in the independent review group, what's in the Raise a Concern, and indeed in the department's own, not the department, the Defence Force's own in independent review. It is quite shocking. And at the heart of it is a culture of fear and people not being in a position or fearful of putting their head above the parapet as the report says, for fear of reprisal or it would be a career-ending move. And promotion is a significant part of the dynamic within the Defence Forces. So the view of a lot of members is that if you make a complaint, you are, without question, limiting your prospects for promotion into the future. Hence, there was that, through the chain of command system and dynamic, that in its own way acted as a suppression was emerging. And in my view, we have to deal fundamentally with all of those issues, quite radically, from the whole training culture, through chain and command, control, and the entire ethos of what a modern defence force should be all about in terms of the threats and challenges that we've had. And it does say in the report, and I'm very mindful of it, that quote that you reiterated there in terms of the resistance to change. And the Chief of Staff, and I have confidence in the Chief of Staff's commitment to change and to reform, but also what's important in that context also is the statutory inquiry that we're now going to establish, which will be a statutory fact-finding inquiry. The Independent Review Group itself acknowledges that it is not quite a fact-finding exercise, but it recommends the establishment of one. And I think there will have to be significant reforms in terms of that whole structure within the Defence Forces, and I will be bringing forward proposals to government in respect of that aspect later.
Thanks, Taoiseach. I'm just a little bit confused about your reply. You spoke about the resistance to change within the institution, the institutional one perhaps, but then spoke about confidence in the leadership being able to change that. So if you could just clarify if you have confidence in the ability for the current leadership to change it, when they're saying they had no awareness. You know, after 40 years of being in an institution, they have absolutely no awareness. I'm wondering if you're worried about the disconnect there, if there is no awareness, and your confidence in that. The report is really blunt and clear, and it states that neither men or women in the Defence Forces are working in a safe environment, and that's a shocking indictment about our state Defence Forces in 2023. The institution can't guarantee safety for its own members, not just in a conflict zone, but in a barracks here. It also has to be stressed that much of this abuse isn't just bad behaviour, it's criminal in nature. And I welcome all the recommendations of the report, and I do also want to take this opportunity to commend the hard work and diligence of its authors and the Women of Honour, and indeed Katie Hannon, but I'm concerned at the length of time that it might take to introduce those recommendations. And you talked about the internal complaints body. There's clearly, obviously, understandably, no trust in that. And one of the recommendations is for an external one. I'm just wondering, when can we expect to see the reforms, not just legislated for, that's required, but implemented and working? Because we know that this is happening up until today, could be happening now.
I think that's a fair point. What I'm saying is basically, I'm very mindful of the report's conclusions about the resistance, okay? The Chief of Staff is committed to change and to reform. We will quickly develop legislation to appoint an independent external complaints process. That has to happen. And indeed, there will be interim steps taken to facilitate complaints either directly to the Ombudsman, which can happen now. They don't have to wait for a month anymore or anything like that. And also then to establish an oversight body on a statutory basis. And that oversight body will be completely external to the Defence Forces, but will be able to oversee the reform that's needed, the culture change that's required. And thirdly, we will be amending the Defence Act of 1954 to provide the legislative basis to enable allegations of any type of sexual assault in the Defence Forces in the state to be referred to An Garda Síochána. We'll also be setting up a non-statutory inquiry into the practice or the process of medical boarding, and in respect of the issues pertaining to suicide, I envisage taking expert bodies in to assess that issue in a professional way from those who have expertise in that field.